Hey everyone, Notion workflow here. In today's video, we'll be using the let's function to slowly build and create an advanced profit equation and output, and we'll also be nesting in various Notion formula functions. And so by the end of this video, we'll have 7 properties that we'll be referencing to output profit. Feel free to skip ahead if you're already familiar with basic Notion formula functions, as we'll get started here with just the basics and slowly and iteratively build on it and integrate the other properties that we might want to use. I have a products database with revenue and units, and then a formula function in that same database titled profit. We'll begin by using the let's function. Type in let's, open that up, and then we'll do shift enter 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Close it out, and now we've set up our basic let's function. And with the let's function, you have to name a variable and then define it. And then at the end of the formula, you want to output using those variables. So in our case, we might want to measure the total of the profit that you might generate through the multiplication of the revenue and units. So we can do revenue times units to make the total output happen. We can close that out with a comma so that the variable is set. And then I'm going to tab twice so we can add the variable total, and notice how the error disappears. And now we are just referencing total, which is just revenue times units. So if we do 5 times 10, it'll do 50. And maybe we can edit the formula so we can keep that dollar unit. Now that we have this very basic total calculation, let's build on it further. Let's add another property and title it margins. Maybe every product has a different margin, and we want to calculate the profit that references that margin. So let's say this product has a profit margin of 80%, which is 0.8. And now let's add it into our formula function to build upon our revenue and unit equation that we've started. And maybe in this case, it makes sense to add another variable. We'll add margin, and we'll just make margin equivalent to the margins database property that we set up. So we can close that variable out, and let's add another shift enter to create that spacing between lines. And let's say the margins we want to multiply with the total, right? We want to take the margins off the total. So we can multiply total times margin. So notice how that number changes because our margin is 0.8, and so 80% of $50 is going to be 40. Same here. If we are to name another product currently set up so that if we don't include a margin, it's going to equal 0. If that's going to be okay with you, we can keep it that way as well. In any case, if we do want to have profit appear even when margin is empty, we could nest an if function that says if margin dot empty equals true, right? If margins as a property is empty, then we'll make it equivalent to 1. And then if not, we will do the number that we assigned in the property. Notice how this error occurs. Invalid character equal sign. What we can do is add that equal sign because that is the sort of notation and syntax that we need to keep within the formula. And now that formula works. So basically what we did here is if we don't include any margin, notice how the profit still appears because we've set up that formula so that if the margins are empty, we'll always just multiply itself by 1, and the total doesn't change, and it doesn't equal 0. So that's a really easy way to make sure that your equation doesn't go to 0 simply because a property is not filled. Maybe we have a special within these products that we can annotate through a checkbox. And let's say this special, whenever we click on the checkbox, it impacts our profit. So what we can do now is let's create another variable and call it special. And because it's just checkbox, we need a way to manipulate it as a number. We're going to go ahead and do that by using the toNumber function and then referencing the special. And let's say when a product special is ordered, our profits decrease by a factor of $100. So what we can do is multiply toNumber special by 100 and then close that out with a comma so that when the special is marked as checked, the special incurs $100 of cost within the profit equation. Now what we can do to the very end of that output is subtract the special, so that in any case that product does incur a special checkbox, we'll subtract that cost right away. So let's see that in action. I'm going to raise these units to 100 and then see what happens when we click on special. When we click on special, it decreases by 100. When we click on special here, it decreases by 100. Now we've basically nested 4 properties within this one profit equation using 3 number properties and then a checkbox. As you can imagine, you can nest this toNumber formula function in a variety of ways, so you're not just limited to this one multiplication. Something we might also want to consider is something in reference to a date. I think most databases that people use have a date that they like to reference, and in our case, maybe date is important when it comes to shipping or delivery. We'll just call this delivery date so that we have a date that we could potentially reference that might impact our profit. And maybe something to note within a delivery is when it's been complete. When a delivery date and complete are checked, maybe that impacts the profit of our product. And let's consider something that manipulates both the complete checkbox and the delivery date that might impact our bottom line. So let's say that if our delivery date is within 2 weeks of today, we will include a certain fee. And let's also say that when the complete checkbox is marked as complete, that is when the fee will occur. Again, we can slowly build on this profit equation by introducing another variable, call it fees, for example, and we can start to define it right away. So we can easily define fees as a variable. Let's start with if the delivery date is within 2 weeks of today. If the date between now, which is referencing the current moment, and the delivery date, we can scroll to find that variable. We want to measure that in days. We want to say if the date between now and the delivery date is more than or equal to 14 days, which is equivalent to 2 weeks, we want to have it be true. And if not, we can do false. 1 and 0 work as true and false representations as well, and can be used interchangeably as true or false, like we did here. Now we have an output we've created where if the date between the delivery date and now is more than 14 days, let's mark it as true. And again, because we mentioned that we wanted the complete property to also be marked, we want to say when it's not empty, this complete checkbox, and the date between delivery date is greater than 14, then let's mark as true, right? So now the fees that we incur only happen if the delivery date is 14 days before now and when the complete is marked as checked. So we've created this sort of toNumber equivalent within this formula that references those two conditions. And let's say we incur a $150 fee. So what we can do is just multiply 150, or the fee that we can manually specify, with that ifs formula output that references a binary output as well. So now what we can easily do is say, let's subtract the fees as well that might be incurred if these conditions are met. So I click on done, and let's test out this formula function that we just set up. So 2 weeks before today would be January 25th, and let's make it complete. So let's see what happens when I click on complete for product 1. Bam. That profit decreases by 150. Notice what happens when I click on complete. Because both conditions need to be met, that fee only applies when these conditions are met. And as you can imagine, it's really easy to nest these different variables, and it's up to you to know how you want to manipulate those variables by adding numerical attributes and using these basic formula functions together so that you can consider all aspects of the bottom line. So if we were to do January 26th, that doesn't quite work because that is under the 14-day period that we specified. So if I go back to 24, that 150 gets subtracted. If I go back to 25, it's the same, simply because we added that equal symbol next to the greater than symbol. So those are some small details to note. And as you can imagine, we can go even further with this profit equation. Let's say there are 3 different categories of this product that we're selling. I'm just adding these 3 arbitrary categories for the sake of this example. Let's say we have 3 different product categories and we want to change how the profit is calculated based on that property that we specify. So let's say that a person is assigned each product and they're also assigned a product category that might change or impact the commission that this person might receive from the shipment or the sale of these products. And maybe the commission changes based on the select property in which we've specified these categories. So we can add a new variable, shift enter, let's title this commission, and let's define it. So as those categories suggest, each one of those statuses will incur a different commission amount. And we want to specify by select properties, and by doing that we can set some values. Because it's a select property, the best way to go about referencing these statuses is by finding the property itself in the formula, clicking on it, and then using the contains formula function to check if a certain text is included within the status field itself. Again, there's 3 different types, and so the ifs formula is going to allow us to do this 3 different times using the 3 different texts that we've specified, right? So we'll have basic, and I'll just do 0 for now as the output for each of these to show. I'm going to do shift tab and show that instance so that it lines up. I'm going to do contains basic, contains premium, shift enter. Again, we're going to do select because that's the property name, dot contains, and the last one is limited. We're going to add 0 as those outputs and then close it out with an empty quotation mark, and then close that out with another comma so the variable is defined. Basically, in this formula we said if the select property contains this text, show this number. If it contains premium, show this number. If it contains limited, show this number. And so a commission is going to be a fractional portion that's going to impact profit. So we're going to subtract that from 1. So let's say there is a 15% commission for basic. There is a 20% commission for premium, and there is a 25% commission for limited. So as you can imagine, the more premium a product is, the more commission is associated, because if you subtract these numbers from 1, we'll have 25%, 20%, and then 15%. Now what we can do is, now that we define these numbers, we can create that interaction within this total profit that we've been working on. So we can multiply the total by margin, which also affects our profit. But I think what we can also do next is we can multiply the total, the margins, and the commission so that we get a more accurate profit equation within this formula. Let's say we take away those margins, we remove the special, so that changes, and we also remove complete, which changes as well. Now the problem here is product 2, which doesn't have a select, is resulting in 0. And the reason for that is because we did 0 here. In our case, we can change that to 1, and now that total appears. Previously we had it as an empty number, and so when you multiply any number by 0, it's always going to be 0. Those are some of the smaller details to pay attention to, right? If you don't want anything to change, you just multiply it by 1. Otherwise, if these other statuses are the case, we can output different numbers. Let's see these statuses in action. We have 2 $500 totals, and let's see what happens when we change to basic. That gets cut to $425, right? If we do 2 premium, it's even less, right? Because the higher the commission, the lower your profit. And then if we do limited, it gets even smaller, $375. So that's another way in which we can utilize select properties and even multi-select properties as long as the hierarchy is ordered within the formula itself. Now that we have a real profit equation, let's add some supporting text and enhance this output entirely. Maybe we can add total take-home profit is plus, and we can just add that text and combine it with this number. Now what happens here is you get this output that says cannot do math on text and number. So what that means is we can't interact a text output that we specified with a number output on its own. A very simple fix to this is we can use the format function, open and close, and now we have an easier way in which we can integrate the two different strings. So we need to create that space. Let's also add that dollar symbol. So now we have total take-home profit is $500. We can see that the formula looks that way. If we add that special, subtract 100, maybe our margins are different. Now if we have a complete order in which it's less than 2 weeks, that also changes. And then our margins also get smaller when we have select property that falls in between one of these three categories. So I think now what's important here is to relate the commission of these products to the person that is in charge. We have a very basic way to illustrate profit, but now let's say who gained the commission for each product and what percent that the commission was for. In formula properties, once you configure them in the back end, you'll only know through the formula property itself what numerically is used within the profit equation. And so in some cases, you might want to directly reference these numbers into sort of a neat formula text output so that you know how everything works. Since it might look a little clunky to just have everything on one line, we are going to add a line break. We can do that by adding plus, quotation, backward slash, which is under the backspace key for most keyboards, n, close quotes, and then let's add some text to show how that works. Notice how that text outputs on the second line, and we can keep building on this profit equation and reference other properties as well. So we have a person property. I'll just reference myself for example purposes. We'll create another variable and call it person, and that is just going to be equivalent to the person property, and we can close that variable out. In this case, variable is named the same thing, so it might not be as helpful, but this is again to illustrate the power of the let's function using formula functions. We can reference the define variable in the let's function by just typing in person, and now we can add open quotes commission. If we just add that text and that variable name, it can look like this. Ray Clark's commission is blank. In our second example, because a person is not there, we might want to change that output. So the way that we can do this, and I think you'll eventually experience this the more you play around with formulas, is creating precise outputs so that when something is empty, let's not show certain text. What's neat about Notion formulas is you can nest if formulas anywhere within the let's function itself. So let's say if the person variable is empty, then we're going to show nothing, and if it isn't, we will show this. And we just nested that profit or that commission variable and said if person is empty, let's not show any text, but if it isn't, let's show the apostrophe s commission is colon. So now if we compare the two outputs, you can see that difference in action, and we just quickly nested that into this formula. If we have a person that is filled within the person property, that also probably means that a certain commission is going to be incurred based on the category that you set in the select property that we've created here. In our case, we might want to show that commission rate, and so let's use that commission variable that we defined earlier within this output. We can do that by building on this ifs formula and then this text output that we generated here. We want to say this person's commission is, and then we also want to add a variable commission, which comes out like that. So if we just simply add that commission within that output, it'll look something like this. Now, the thing with the commission is because it's a decimal, let's change that into a percent and sort of the inverse of what we're seeing as a number. So in our case, it would be 1 minus that number. And because we're doing math now within this output, we need to do format and contain that output so that we can put it together. We've inversed the commission as a decimal. but now we need to show it as a percent as opposed to a decimal. We can do that by multiplying it by 100. And then what we can also do is add that percent symbol to convert that decimal into an actual commission-based percentage. So now it says, because my select is a limited product, it says 25%. Notice if I do basic, the number and the commission changes as well. Premium, 20%. And we just did that by referencing a variable we already defined and then slightly changed and added some conversion factors so that we can format it into this output that we've stacked through all of these different formula variables and functions. Now, one missing property that we haven't highlighted is the delivery date. So let's quickly add that as well. We don't have to necessarily define the delivery date, and we can mention the property itself, and that will look like that. Now, off the bat, it might look a little funky, and maybe we want to add a new line. So I'm going to do Shift-Enter again, plus, quotation, /n, close, and then create that spacing. So now it'll look like this, and we can say delivery date quotes plus. Now when we click on done, we have a delivery date of January 25th, like we specified. We'll add a space to make that a little neater. But now delivery date appears even when it's empty. So again, we're back to our scenario where we only want to show delivery date when delivery date is not empty. If delivery date is empty, we want to show nothing. And then if it isn't empty, we want to show this output that we've created here. Notice how that was very easy. I can add that spacing to isolate those outputs. Click on done. So now delivery date disappears and we have it appear only when it is shown. I'm going to delete these products and start from scratch to see how profit changes. So take home profit is $0 because nothing is added within these properties. Let's say the revenue per product is $50 and we have 50 units. Again, the take home profit is now $2,500, which is the product of those two numbers. If we add that margin of 0.9, it slowly goes down. Maybe we'll do 0.8 to give it a nice round number. And because it was a special, we'll subtract that $100. And it was $150 off because the delivery date is within 2 weeks. And then now when we add that commission, it also goes down because a certain margin is taken, which also implies that a certain person must be assigned. And so when a person is assigned, it says the person's name and the commission that they're guaranteed based on what you specify. The further you go down, incrementally, the profit decreases. And now we have the delivery date shown as well. Remember, if we just have an empty product, nothing else, that's what it would look like. And everything changes based on what you fill and what you don't fill. This is just to highlight and encourage everyone to incrementally take on Notion formulas, because the slower you work on it, the more intuitive it becomes. And as you can imagine, these aren't that complicated. And these are very simple formulas that I've shared on my channel and that many people use that you can easily use as well, right? I think in some ways this is a compilation of everything that I've been summarizing and explaining over the last 5 months on my channel. And it's not as hard as it looks once you dig a little deeper and you start to think about formulas in terms of variables and different property types so you can take advantage of everything and glue them together. Thank you if you stuck along this far, and hopefully you learned a thing or two and perhaps creating a profit equation by naming many different variables using the let's formula function. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate the support. Plan on continuing to grow this channel in 2024. So if you're not subscribed already, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to me and turn on that notification bell so that you can know when my videos come out weekly, every Monday in the morning in Pacific Standard Time. Thanks.